Grissom or Pegasus? Either way, it's coming up next. Well, hey guys, and welcome back to another Initiative Modeler. So, ready to get started here with my kit of the USS Grissom. And before I start here, like many of you, I have a list of YouTubers that I like to watch and follow. Two of my favorites are Lou Dalmasso and Boyd from Trekworks. They've both done some excellent builds of this ship, so if you're interested in taking a look at their videos, the link is below. Now, they both decided to name their ship after the USS Grissom, but I've decided to name mine the Pegasus because the Pegasus episode of Next Generation is one of my favorites. Now, this model has been out for a little while, but in case you're not familiar with it or haven't watched any other builds, let's take a look inside the box first. So the model parts are attached to 4 trees. The first has the primary hull, the nacelle struts, and a piece that inserts into the forward part of the pontoon section. Next, we have the pieces for the pontoon section, which included 2 sides and the top. The next 2 trees have the top and bottom of the platform that the primary hull sits on, along with pieces of the nacelles. Here we have the clear windows, and a look at the decal sheet, and finally a peek at the instructions, and the sides of the box, which has instructions for painting and decal placement. So, not being too familiar with the details of the ship itself, I always thought that the paint scheme was fairly simple. But as with many of the ships that we see in the Trek movies, the paint scheme is a bit more detailed. And so at first I was just going to follow the paint scheme on the box and maybe do some of the Aztecing here on the pontoon section. But after watching Lou Dalmasso and seeing what he did with his paint mask, I decided to pursue that and get his paint mask. So let me take a minute to show you the paint mask from Lou Dalmasso. So if you can swing it, Lou's paint masks are well worth it. They're high quality and he puts a lot of time and effort into designing them. And as I've seen in the past with his other mask kits I've used, this one includes some nicely detailed instructions that not only provide guidance on applying the masks, but also includes the colors he's used with his own build. After watching Lou's build and seeing how good the model looked with the paint scheme you see here on the platform and nacelles, I decided to go for it, as the mask will make this job a lot easier. And as for the colors I'll be using, well, that's always kind of the dilemma with Star Trek models, right? Do you paint it like the miniature? Do you paint it like it looked on screen? A lot of times those two don't equate. Sometimes if you paint it like the miniature, people aren't going to always recognize it. So obviously this is your choice. What I plan to do here is to follow Lou's lead. He's been kind enough to provide some suggestions with his instructions there as to the colors he used, so I'm pretty much going to follow what he did. My brands of paints may differ, but I'll let you know as I go along here. As for lighting now, the model is prepped for lighting. As you can see in this shot here, there are pre-drill holes like you see here in the pontoon section for running lights, and certainly there are the holes for the windows and so forth. Now I plan to use SMD LEDs from Evan Designs for all of this, but I'm going to be hooking them into the HLI circuit board. That's the circuit board from HobbyLink International. So let me spend an extra minute here to show you what I have planned for lighting. So the effects that I will have with the lighting will be provided by this board here from HLI. It's available on their site for $20 and will allow for blinking navigation lights, strobe effects, as well as options for dynamic impulse engine effects. Nano-sized SMDs will be used for most of the lights except for the impulse engines, which will be chip-sized. These size notations are what can be found on evandesigns.com's website. Cool white strip lighting will provide illumination for the windows. So it's funny, sometimes I do find myself struggling to decide whether or not to include certain options with a build because, these are all added expenses you have to think of. So this time around, I'm adding all the bells and whistles. Hopefully this video will help you determine whether or not it's worthwhile adding to your own. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I primed all the model parts and started the build here by assembling the pontoon section. This is the same first step that both Lou and Boyd did with their builds. Pontoon has two halves, which of course leaves a seam along the entire length that you have to address. And for this I ended up using Bondo's glazing putty because my other stuff was all dried out. And this worked out well as I applied a thin strip along the seam followed by sanding, and I proceeded to work at it until the seam was adequately concealed. Now, one thing I'm doing differently this time around is attaching the mounting post early on. In the past I've left this step for the end, and oftentimes what ends up happening is I ended up cracking the seam that is on both sides of the opening as I fiddle with the mounting post to install it. Here I was able to address any issues early on and have the mounting post masked off to avoid any stray paint from getting onto it. Okay, well I'm going to go ahead and leave this overnight just to make sure that the two-part epoxy is all set and secure. That's the stuff I used to secure the mounting post. And I do have a small seam at both the forward and aft sections where the two parts join as well. Alright, so it's the next day, ready to get started. Everything is nice and dry. So what I'm going to do, however, is rather than start with light installation, I'm going to do some painting first. And so we're using obviously loose paint masks here now. And that process is going to start with painting these grill sections gunmetal, as well as this area here of the top section. Now, the model is going to be painted with a medium gray after that, and then I'll be laying down the paint masks for the pontoon section and applying the lighter shade. Now, as for that light color, I was originally going to use Tamyia White, but I don't know about you guys. I always find it's a bit of a challenge to apply white paint. And yesterday, as I was experimenting with this and having to thin it down, it was coming out a bit inconsistent out of the airbrush, and you know, when all was said and done, in combination with this color and the primer, it actually looked like a very light shade of gray, which turns out very similar to this color I have here from Mission Models. This is their light gray. It's almost a white color, and it's been a while since I've used Mission Models paints, but I recall them coming out fairly easily out of the airbrush, and so when I sprayed it yesterday, that was the case. And since the colors are very similar, I'm going to go ahead and use this instead. So this is going to be the lightest shade on the model. One other thing I want to make note of here is I mistakenly left out this section when I pieced these two halves together. I was so focused on addressing this seam and all of that that I didn't even bother to look at the instructions before assembling, but it's not a big deal. You know, one of the reasons I was thinking of leaving this out to begin with was because it'd be easier to paint, because this has to be painted at gunmetal also, but I want to do some paneling on this too, and I thought it'd be a lot easier to do that with it out of this section here. But when I was wrapping everything up last night, I decided to try to just dry fit this, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be a problem getting that in there because they have these tabs here, which I ended up just cutting out. It's not a big deal because once I was able to slide it in there, which does so easily now, it's nice and secure, and it will be further secure once you glue it down. So that's what I'm going to end up doing then, is do the paneling and the painting and the paneling on this first. Okay, so that is the plan. Let's go ahead and begin. Okay, so what I've got going on now is I've applied some of the metallic paint. You have gunmetal that goes on the top of the saucer section, on this round section here, on the two side panels, and on this raised area along the top of the pontoon section. Now, if you'll notice here, I'm not yet using loose painting masks, because even though you are using those painting masks, there is some masking you still need to do on your own. Pretty much just in this one section. He does not include any masks for the side panels, and nor does he include one for this raised area. The side panels, are basically straight lines, so he mentions in the instructions it's a simple process, just to use masking tape, and it was. You can just put one way to do it is just to put a big piece of masking tape and then just use a sharp X-Acto knife to cut along there. I didn't quite do that. I'm always afraid I'm going to be scratching some of the models, so I went ahead and just applied it in strips. Wasn't that hard to do, and this section wasn't that difficult to do either. You can tell there's just one section that's being left open here for the application of the medium gray that's going to go on top of that. As for this front section now, a modeler by the name of Randall Lee suggested using some craft paints, and that's what I've got going on here. And I decided to go this route because the model store has been short on paint supplies, and because of that I couldn't really find any colors anyway I was satisfied with, so I I decided to go ahead and get a hold of these, which were easy to do at Michael's. I've gotten used to now working with craft paints, and the trick is, again, I know I've shown this in the past few videos, filtering. All right, just when you filter the paint, it really is very simple to do as long as you have that filter. Again, I'll put the link below, and it airbrushes really easily. It does not get gunked up in the airbrush. Now, what I've decided to do then is to use the brushed metal silver for the front section, because the reference pictures that I'm using show pictures of the Pegasus model, and this might be different with the Grissom, but it distinctly shows a different color on this forward section versus these side panels. I think it's helpful to do this anyway because I'm going to be doing some paneling here, and so it'd be easy to get some better contrast starting out with a lighter color. Now with this section here, this is the platform that everything sits on and the nacelles hooked to. You can see now I have the blue-gray color applied to these panels. And I decided to mask these over, as you can see here, prior to painting. This is just done out of paranoia, basically, because I didn't want any oversprayed areas to look different than the rest of it, right? Because Lou suggests, and you definitely can do this, is just simply paint in the colors, and then when you're ready to apply your lighter shade, you just use his painting masks then, which he provides for these, to put into these sections. But I'm just a little paranoid that the combination of colors is going to look different around areas that were oversprayed, so rather than taking the chance of doing that, I went ahead and applied the masking tape as you see here. And this is how they came out. So, ready now to apply the medium gray color, and that color now is a combination of more craft paint. It's this stuff here, simple gray paint here with some black mixed into it, and a few drops of Prussian blue. Alright, so I wanted to show you the pontoon section now masked off. There's definitely plenty of more masking to do, but I thought I would stop here just to show you that the paint masks here consist of these stripes along with some other masking that I've done here. And as I was putting this together, I kept debating on what to do with the colors. As I mentioned earlier, I was thinking of using the light gray as our lighter shade. However, I think that's still going to be too dark. I pulled out my Kelvin model and looked at that, which used a very similar color, and it definitely looks on the gray side. So what I'm going to do now is switch back to the Tamyia. I went ahead and reviewed some videos on how to thin this paint, and I think I've got it down then. So I'm going to go ahead and use that as our light shade. However, it's going to be quite a contrast between the gray and white, of course. So what we're going to do to blend all that together is then use a fine mist of the light gray, and I think that'll be a good way to go. The saucer section, as I've looked at the reference pictures now, it definitely looks white in those pictures. So I'm going to apply the Tamyia White, kind of see how that looks. If it's too bright, we'll tone it down also with the light gray. Okay, well, all the painting masks are on. A few more things I need to do with this one as I'm painting, but this one in particular was the toughest one. I didn't record this because there was just really a lot of maneuvering around, but as you can imagine, it's not as simple as just kind of laying them down like this. You have to kind of start on one end and gradually work your way down. And as you're doing so, these thin strips here that connect these different shapes are a challenge to try to keep straight, so I ended up snipping some of them in order to adhere some of these other sides down and then reattaching them. So this is all set now. Let's go ahead and move on with applying the lighter color. Okay, well I have to say I'm pretty happy the way this is turning out. Comparing it to the reference pictures, I think it's looking pretty close. One other thing I wanted to let you guys know about with the Pegasus, there is this other painted feature here, and it was a matter of just masking that off and using one of the vinyl strips to create a nice clean line in between. So I'm not sure that's on the Grissom, but it's definitely on the Pegasus. It's easily seen in the reference pictures. Okay, well the next thing to do now is to move ahead with paneling this, and the plan is to first use a light shade of this, just a light spray of this Obsidian color, and this is kind of like a black metallic, and that'll give us bold stripes going this way. And then I'm going to randomly use just some squared off pieces of masking tape or paper here and there to create the paneling. So I'll show you how that goes in just a second. Now the Obsidian color seems kind of dark, but remember we can lighten that contrast up just by the same technique that we've done with the rest of this. Okay, forward section is ready to go, and as you can see I've got some masking tape on the pontoon section as well. This is going to be a lot more subtle than what we're going to be doing here with the forward nose cone. Alright, well now that the stripes are done here, and you can see how it came out, I'm going to start randomly putting in rectangles of different widths and lengths. Okay guys, well that is going to do it here for part 1. I'll pick up in part 2, starting off with light installation and completing the project. So a couple things I wanted to make mention of here. First of all, I'm so happy that I left this part out because I don't think I would have been able to achieve the look of the paneling that I was able to get here if this was installed already. So I was able to slide in right into place. I just had to remove those tabs that I told you of, but I don't foresee there's going to be any problems. I just have to glue it in place, but I'll let you know if I do run across any issues with that. Secondly, I do think the painting masks have been very helpful, so if you can swing the cost of his painting masks, I think you'll find them a useful tool, particularly with trying to get some of these intricate patterns here on this deck as well as the nacelles. No doubt you could achieve it with masking tape as well, but it's a lot easier to have this already cut out for you. But even with that said, there of course still is masking that you need to do, especially if you're doing the type of paneling I was doing at the very end there. Okay, a couple of things I want to make mention of. The reference photos now are from Modelers Miniatures Magic. I'll put the link below. There are a whole host of reference photos of all kinds of models that you'll find there. There are plenty of pictures of the Pegasus. I don't see any of the Grissom, at least with the way the model was configured for Star Trek 3. It's my understanding it's hard to find those, but if you're going to be doing Pegasus, there's plenty of pictures to use as reference. I think you'll find those helpful. And lastly, there'll be a little bit of a gap here between part 1 and part 2, so just bear with me on that. I have to get a couple things ready here for Comic-Con, which is about 2.5 weeks away. I am trying to finish this painting that I'll be, I might have mentioned I'm going to be hanging some of my art at the San Diego Comic-Con art show. So if you happen to be in San Diego, and if you don't have a ticket for Comic-Con, you don't need one to get into the art show. This year it's going to be hosted in a different building. I think it's in the Marriott right next to the convention center. You can check out san diegocomiccon.org to find out more information about that. But it's always a really cool show that they have there every year. A bunch of different artists will be hanging things in and exhibiting things, so check it out if you get a chance. All right, so that's going to do it for now. If you have any questions about what I've been working on here or what I've done so far, feel free to leave a comment down below or email me at illustratormodeler@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys then in part 2. Take care.